Ready when you are, Jay. You're the last one.
All right. So let me just get my screen shared. Right. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
All right. So good morning here from the East Coast, where we almost had a hurricane here in New Hampshire, but apparently not anymore. I hope the weather is not a hurricane wherever y'all are. So I'm Jay Colbert. Today I will be presenting TIL, which is Today I Learned, creating open documentation through public note-taking and literate programming. If you want to look at the plain text org mode document that I created this presentation from, as well as the HTML reveal JS slide document, you can go to my GitHub repository here, and I'll share this in the chat after I turn off my do not disturb mode. I will share this in the chat for folks. Where's the chat? There it is. All right. Okay. I will get into technical stuff near the end of the presentation where I give a short demonstration, but otherwise this is going to be some me talking and sharing examples. So the structure of this talk, first I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am and why that's relevant. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience learning Primo VE without any sort of help, and why that inspired this presentation. Then I'm going to go over the importance of good open documentation. Then I'll go over a little bit about my suggested paradigm of learning in public for creating open shared documentation. I'll go give a brief overview of some of the methods, including a quick demonstration, and then time for questions at the end. So who am I? Again, my name is J.L. Colbert, not Colbert. Sorry to disappoint anyone. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the metadata and discovery strategy librarian at the University of New Hampshire. I don't actually do any data entry or even systems work, really. Our faculty are more in like strategy, policy, direction roles, but I do manage our Primo VE discovery layer as part of my discovery duties. And then what's relevant for this presentation is that my bachelor's degree is in literature, not in any sort of coding, computer science, technical field, or even something like data science. So here's a little brief overview of what I went through while trying to learn Primo VE and how to configure it and customize it, especially the development environment for customization packages. So in September of 2019, which really was the last day of September, so functionally October, I was hired at the University of New Hampshire. And one of my primary position responsibilities is managing our Primo VE discovery layer. Now pay attention to these dates. So I was hired, started at the end of September, and Primo and Alma were implemented in July. So even though it's my job to manage this, it was implemented, set up, and configured without me and by people who would not be working on it, nor did any of them have any previous experience with it. And so they also were really bad at writing down why and how they did what they did, or even who did it, and wouldn't even know to tell me or think to tell me those kinds of things, which is kind of a problem if you've ever been in that kind of situation. I'm also early career, so there's still a lot I'm learning too. So what were some of my challenges while then trying to figure all of this out on my own? Well, like I said, I'm new to this software. I had never had to configure it before, but so is every single other person in my institution. I have no formal tech background beyond the metadata experience that I have. My dad was a computer guy, so I know my way around a command line and whatnot, but I didn't go to school for that at all. And when I was looking up, instructions and documentation and how do I do X, Y, Z, I ran into a lot of problems primarily around language and jargon. I know there's only so much jargon we can reduce when writing documentation within a community, but I was like, well, what's the difference between Primo and Primo VE? What is the back office? What is the NUI? Does Primo VE include the NUI? Can I do the same things in VE that I theoretically could do in the back office if I had access to that? When do I know where to look where? And I know there is a VE dedicated section on the Ex Libris knowledge base, but especially if I am watching a presentation or on someone's GitHub repository, it can be hard to know what they're talking about sometimes. And documentation isn't even always clear about what you're working with, or what you can do or where to look. A recent example is we were having a hard time having DOIs work in the citation, the fetch item. And the Primo VE documentation gives no information on how to configure that beyond just changing labels and then turning it on and off in the top menu links. The documentation for how to do the cross-rest stuff is in the Alma documentation, and that doesn't even say that that will configure the fetch item thing for you. We eventually figured it out, but that's the sort of issues that I'm talking about here. And also a lot of the documentation and third-party information is years out of date or isn't even relevant to Primo VE anymore. For example, the amazing customization guide for Primo VE still has jQuery in it and doesn't have Angular JavaScript in it. And there's been no update on how to change that, as far as I'm aware, the last time I checked. And relevant to our purposes, so the Primo development environment actually does contain information for Primo VE, even though it was made for regular Primo, and it works great. That's good. However, most of the third-party packages that you might install through npm, like the node packages, a lot of those are done in a back office environment, and so weren't ever tested on VE and might not even include instructions on how to do it in VE or if it will work. Also, many of these third-party packages, especially the Boston University libraries ones, which at UNH we use a lot of those, they're amazing, but they use the browserify option when you're in the gulp command line, like create package and whatnot. And Ex Libris does not provide official documentation for that method. And if you're going to use that method, you have to completely change how your repository is structured and what files are called and how you even structure those documents. And it won't, their packages like sometimes won't even work without the browserify option. So what did I even do to get all of this to work so that UNH's customization packages were functional and had all of the third-party stuff we wanted? I did a lot of exploring GitHub repositories. And this was mainly in the forms of different commits, issues people raised, pull requests. I did a lot of just searching in repositories and seeing what came up, because surely I wasn't the first person in the world to have these questions. I know a lot of librarians, even in tech roles, don't come from tech backgrounds. And so a lot of us are still trying to figure all of this out. And that is eventually how I had to learn all this, was just going through GitHub repositories. I also watched a lot of conference presentations or found the slides and read through those, hopefully with speaker notes. But unfortunately, a lot of those were also years out of date or not for a VE development environment. Mainly, I did a lot of, and the safe for work version of this is messing around and finding out. There's another word that goes in the mess slot, but I'll let you use your imaginations. Lots of sleepless nights in Visual Studio Code, just going, why won't this work? How do I do this? And just trying and trying and trying again until something would stick. For instance, when I was installing the NYU search bar submenu, and then it wouldn't work, I was like, well, what do I do? How do I get this to do what I want it to do? Same thing with the Orbis Cascade Alliance external search. For some reason, that wasn't working for me. And so a lot of just going in and even going into the node packet, the node module, and seeing what that code looked like until I eventually figured it out. So this leads me to why documentation is so important. Quickly, a single source of truth saves time and energy for everyone. Documentation is essential to quality and process control. If you want a product to be sort of consistent across the board, no matter who is using it, you need to have good documentation for how to get it to that point. Documentation cuts down duplicative work. It makes hiring and onboarding easier. So if for some reason we hire another person to help me with Primo, or if I leave my position, if I have good documentation for how I did what I did, why I did what I did, and then what to do in case that doesn't work, that means that's less for that new person to figure out. It also increases collective knowledge. You know, if I hoard my little knowledge like a dragon, then there's someone else like me who has to go through GitHub and, you know, search on DuckDuckGo for days and days and days and months and months and months trying to figure things out. Where if I just shared it, then that's less time for someone else. With documentation, we are able to share our knowledge with others internally and externally. We recently had to go through a lot of this at UNH because we had a lot of retirements within tech services. And so the issue of that collective institutional knowledge was very at the front of our minds. And without documentation, knowledge is lost over time, which means consistency is lost, which means quality control is lost. And in my sort of research for this, especially in the realm of technical writing and technical documentation, I found that there's sort of two main kinds of technical documentation. There's system-based, so here's what the system does. And then there's task-based. Here's how to do your job using the system. We need more task-based when we're sort of writing down how we did what we did, and sort of system-based even I think could be more task-based, because a system doesn't maintain itself or do things in a vacuum. Someone is maintaining that. So how to get the system to do what it does, we need to tell people how to do that, right? So I would say we need to move more towards task-based documentation as opposed to system-based documentation. So one of my paradigms for this would be the concept of learning in public, which can be kind of scary because so when you're learning something, you might take private notes, or you might just remember it all in your head. You might make little comments in your source code, whatever. You might tweet about it. You might, you know, rant to your partner, but it's private. Whereas if you make all of that information that you normally keep private public, that can be really vulnerable because you're exposing yourself at a time where you might not yet have all the answers, where you might be wrong. You're basically allowing people to see your thought process evolve, including at stages where it's like not quite where it needs to be yet. But that's when learning can be most valuable and where sharing that process can be really helpful. So learning in public is a really good way to track your own learning process because it sort of creates an archive, especially if you're using something like GitHub with version control, you can see how your learning has evolved. It offers a public log for your learning. It offers a way to give you continual feedback. So if other people can see the notes you're taking and what you're learning, people can comment on those and give feedback and say, hey, I did this differently, or you might want to try this way. You know, oh, hey, if you do it that way, it's actually not going to work. You might want to try this way, that kind of thing. That's one reason why Git repositories are so helpful. You also tap into a network of community knowledge. So, you know, you're not the first person in the world to learn this, right? And so you can add to the community knowledge while also benefiting from the community knowledge just by making your little notes, you know, public. So what are some methods of public note taking and learning in public? And I'm going to do a beginner, an intermediate, and an advanced. At least that's how they come off to me. So the first is a Git repository. I'm not going to show you all how to set up a Git repository, but if you need help, just reach out to me after. And the sort of example I want to give was this great one I found. I'll just open a new one. Here we go. So this is a TIL, or Today I Learned repository. This is not mine. I have started one and I need to update it. I need to practice what I preach. And you'll see that this person has theirs sort of organized by different categories. So say I wanted to see what this person has been learning about JavaScript. I could click here and they have all of these markdown notes about, things they learned with JavaScript. They have it all categorized in the README with actual proper titles instead of file names. So say I wanted to check classes on a DOM element, for example, I could just click here and you'll see they've made just like a really quick, short little note on, oh, hey, this is how you can do this thing. And, sometimes I've noticed this person will include where he learned this information or like resources where you can learn more. But he basically just includes how you do it because that's how he learned to do it. And then he can reference that later. The great thing about this being a public GitHub repository is that people can actually raise issues. So someone wants to see an RSS feed, someone wants to see an automated creation of a README. People can also point out different problems that they've had using it, and he's closed these. And with pull requests, people can be like, oh, hey, I actually know a different way of doing this. I improved the description a little bit, or I updated the Git. I fixed a link, that kind of thing, sharing in this collective knowledge. Go back to my presentation. There we go. An intermediate one is something that I've seen called digital gardening. You could also call this personal wikis that people have made public. There's something I've gotten into a lot recently. And digital gardens, basically, like I said, they're kind of personal wikis. And it's used as a metaphor for thinking about writing and creating that focuses less on the resulting showpiece, like you might with a blog post, and more on the process, care, and craft it takes to get there of curating that knowledge. So a lot of people will use digital gardens kind of like digital Zettelkasten, where you sort of have an atomic thought, one small note, and then they link them together through backlinks and wiki links. And so then you can sort of see how a seed of knowledge grows and grows and grows as they curate that knowledge and link it to other thoughts that they've had. And so like a real garden, they are a constant ebb and flow where they're constantly growing, shrinking, being curated. All the tools that I recommend are free and open source. I have purposefully omitted tools which are not free, like Roam Research, which is really popular right now, and or open source like Obsidian. So Obsidian's free, really great tool, but it is actually not open source. A place where you can learn more about digital gardens, I wish this would move, there we go, is this GitHub repository here. It includes tools, more than what I will mention, building gardens, how-tos, even examples that you can look at. They're really neat. The one I really like is this one here. So you can see this person's index, including how many words there are, when it was last updated. So if I click on a topic here, this is a really short little just note someone wrote. But then it has links to other thoughts that they've had, including backlinks. So other things that have linked to this note here. They're really great for creating like a network of your own knowledge. And so some tools that you might see or might want to use are things like Dendron or Foam, which you use both of these within Visual Studio Code, and they just create Git repositories for you. So a lot of people just leave these in GitHub. Logsec is another one. And whereas Dendron and Foam are only markdown files, Logsec also includes org mode files. There's also Neuron, which I haven't played around with. And then org Roam, which is what I use, that uses org mode within Emacs. TiddlyWiki is another one I see sometimes, and that uses HTML files. So a lot of these you can use like GitHub pages and using something like Jekyll or Gatsby to sort of make your own static sites out of them. And then the advanced version, which is where I'll give a tiny demonstration, is something called Literate Programming. Again, I'm not a programmer. This is a concept I came across recently and it changed my life a little bit. So literate programming, to put it simply, is a style and paradigm of programming and documentation, which emphasizes natural language and human ordering logic. It embeds code snippets within your documentation as opposed to putting documentation as comments within your code. And it generates both the software, it generates like the software files from the documentation instead of creating documentation from your source code. It also encourages reproducible research and open access. This is a really good website, like a little blog post for doing literate programming within Emacs and org mode. I'm not going to go over that. Some of the tools are NoWeb, which Emacs uses. There's another tool I saw called Literate. These are all on GitHub. There's PyWeb if you want to do it with Python. Emacs org mode, which is what I use. CodeBraid. I'm sure we've all heard of Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter Notebooks are just literate programming for Python, right? If you're not familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, they're really fun, actually. And then you can also combine these methods and tools. So you can host your digital garden using whatever tool in a Git repository, as well as a website if you want. That would be fun. And you can include any literate programming documents within that, even as part of your digital garden. So I'm going to give a quick demonstration of what this looks like. So this is my GitHub repository for the UNH Primo Explorer development environment. And I'm on my literate programming branch because I'm currently in the process of redoing ours. And so you'll see that I've sort of written out, even like how do you set up your development environment to be exactly like mine is if you want to replicate it. I haven't yet put how to actually use the literate programming yet. It's a work in progress. But if you go into our customization packages, for instance, the main one, I've sort of put what this is. This is the README for our main view. I'm working on actually putting the documentation part of the literate programming in here, but you'll see I have these source code blocks here that include SCSS, they include JavaScript, and you'll notice that I have them grouped by sort of the feature itself and not by file type. And the fun thing about literate programming is that it actually generates like the main.js document. I didn't handwrite this. It was tangled through this document you see here. So let me change. I'm going to change what I'm sharing so that I can show you a little bit how to do this. So this is Emacs, and I use the Doom configuration. Again, not going to show you how to set that up. Let me see. There we go. And let me get that README open that I just showed you. You're going to open? There we go. So this is what this org mode file looks like. And you'll see that there's that's how the source blocks are configured. And what this block does is that this uses the NoWeb syntax. And so you'll see that this will structure the main JS document. And if I go down to, for example, here under the external search, this will put the import statement for the external search package right here once I export it. And so I can just write out everything in my documentation, including my like the extra files to configure things, my libchat, everything within one document, and then it changes and then it tangles it to all the documents it needs to be in. And so there's only really one file I ever have to update. Another fun thing about literate programming is that you can actually run source code within it. So here I have sort of like one of our test customization packages, and you'll see it looks a little different. I already have all of the JavaScript configured, but say I wanted to, I actually don't have a lot of these installed yet within the package. So if I am just writing my configuration document, I don't even need to go to my command line. I use Yarn for adding our packages. I can just go, oh, okay, I'm configuring the search bar submenu. I can do yarn add dev Primo explore search bar sub menu. I'm going to save that. And then so people can see, first we need to install the search bar sub menu package. I'm going to save that. And then within the sort of source block, I can hit Control C, Control V, E. And it takes a second, it's a little slow. But if and you'll see like a little results thing pops up and there's no like result to show. But if I go to my package.json, which takes a second, it's a little slow, you'll see that it actually installed that package for me. I didn't edit this document. The sort of literate programming edited this document for me, which is really, really cool. If I show you just one more quick one. So get my source code going, shell, and I'm going to do results silent so that little thing doesn't pop up. Yarn add dev Primo explore unpaywall. Shout out to the Boston University Libraries people. Control C, Control V, E. Give it a second. And if I go to our package.json, you'll see it got added right there without me touching anything. So I'm going to go back to my presentation now. And it's time for questions. And this is where you can contact me. Feel free to email me. My GitHub is JL Colbert. You can also find me on Twitter at _wild, as in Oscar Wilde, @heart. And I'm gonna get back to any sort of questions we might have or Q&A. Not seeing any yet.
It's very impressive.
Thank you.
I had a look at the second topic, so the digital garden, because of my interest in knowledge graphs. But it's probably me. It has nothing to do with the software, but I found it very difficult to stick with one tool.
I found the same problem as well. I started with Roam Research, but you have to pay to use that, and it doesn't live on your computer. And I'm very big on like, no, I want to use free open source, and I want control over my own files and it to be cross-compatible. So I used Obsidian for a long time, actually, but it just keeps adding things and adding things and adding things and adding things. And so I eventually settled on Emacs. But I was playing around with foam for a little bit for my own digital garden website. I've yet to really migrate that over. But yeah, it took me a long time to sort of find a tool that I liked enough to stick with. And I still even need to migrate mine over from the last tool that I was using. So it's definitely a process. I've been sort of looking into digital gardening for about a year now. And I'm still sort of fiddling with it.
Do you know if there are tools that, so for example, if you're working in one large file, that help you to focus on a certain part that you're editing?
So one of the cool things about Emacs is that org mode is sort of mainly for outlining. And so if you have things, if you like in Markdown, if you create headers, it allows you to sort of
Collapse. Yeah.
go through and like selectively expand what you're working on. So if I have a huge file like this and I just want to look at the directives section, and then I only want to look at the search bar after directive, I can go in there. And so that helps keep the file size small. You could also do several different files. But again, sort of the point is to sort of create one large sort of document. But if you wanted to do a .org file or whatever sort of literate tool you're using for example, each of the like third-party packages you install, you could do that and it would still work the same way and wouldn't conflict. So yeah, good question.
There's a question in the chat. So they ask, how do you manage knowledge discovery? As that is what I have had troubles with the knowledge documentation systems.
For those who prefer Vim, check out VimWiki. Yeah, I've heard of VimWiki. Yeah, the Emacs versus Vim eternal battle. Could you clarify what you mean by managing knowledge discovery within this? Just so I make sure we're on the same page.
Let's see if I can find Angus, then I can give him a voice if he has
Oh, finding stuff you have previously documented. So that is a great thing about GitHub repositories is there is that search feature. And that also searches issues as well as pull requests and stuff. Yeah, with single files, so you can always do like a Control F or Command F for finding things within a single document. Table of contents help with that. And like I said, you don't have to do huge single files. You can break things up. With digital gardens, people try to encourage like not having an index, not having categories, not even really having tags, just going through and only having discovery happen by linking between notes. That's not really the best if you're trying to search a website. And so a lot of people do include, you know, there are people who include indexes or searches. But one of the sort of ethos of like the Zettelkasten is just atomic note linking without, and then that's the only tool for discovery. I don't like that, but it sure is an exercise to find a digital garden like that. Did I answer your question, Angus? Am I understanding what you're asking? Oh, and yeah, sure. Ron wants to share a plugin that makes an auto table of contents for Markdown files on GitHub. That's great because the great thing about org mode and Emacs is it automatically does it for you as well, as long as you like include table of contents and then like this little thingy here, it generates it for you. So that's very nice. And the links work on GitHub, but not GitLab, I think. Oh, and oh yeah, Ron, you do your notes on GitHub. That's great. I'm glad to see people are already kind of doing this. Because yeah, there's so many repositories where I'm like, I wish I knew why you were doing what you're doing. Like I'm trying to make a Docker version of ours. And there are Docker versions, but they don't sort of say like why they do what they do for the configuration. I'm like, but no, I don't want to use New York's. You know, I want to use my own. So So Angus also says, I was interested in how you managed it for yourself, as I tend to find issues when going back to old topics. I haven't been doing this for long enough to have that problem. But yeah, I would just say, making, liberal use of just, searching in a GitHub repository or doing Control F in your documentation. Sometimes people will create like index notes for themselves, like within their own personal notes, and you can put that on GitHub. That sort of is like, oh, here is, where I talk about this, this, and this. And that is like a living document that changes and updates as you update it. That's a really common in the sort of maps of content style of like non-hierarchical note taking, is like keeping a big index of sort of your maps of content, and then putting like what notes where you talk about each thing. I don't have enough for that yet, but you'll see people with thousands and thousands and thousands of notes, and they have like little graphs that show the webs and how everything's connected. So definitely going back and finding things is, something, you have to figure out what style works for you. Some people do have like spaced repetition services that they include, like the Anki flashcards, or I know Obsidian has like a random note feature that it will show you every day. People are always making things for Emacs, and Orgrobe is under active development. So I'm sure someone's come up with that. I think there is a way to configure it with Anki already. So that's another way of going back to old topics as well.
Okay.
Any other questions or anything?
Questions? Yes.
Yeah. And I'll stop sharing. I'll go back to my little people.
So I transformed your presentation to a PDF document.
Okay.
Which is on the Google Drive now. So if there are no other questions, then I would say thank you, Jay.
Thank you
For sharing your presentation.